She fell into his world with nothing but 6 children and a secret, one that turned a quiet man into a protector overnight. He didn't ask why she ran, but when she told him who was coming, he knew he'd die before letting them be taken. The knock was sudden, 2 sharp thuds, no hesitation, no pause. Just enough force to raise every hair on Levi Holt's neck. He rose from his chair without a word, rifle already in hand, boots hitting the floor with a low thud that carried through the silent cabin. The night beyond his window was blacker than tar, the wind still, the world holding its breath. No one knocked past dark out here, not unless they had a death wish. Or worse, nowhere else to go. He opened the door slowly, expecting a trap, a trick, a mistake. What he found instead was a woman, barely standing, arms trembling, her body hunched like something folding under its own weight. Her shawl was soaked through, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide but unfocused. And behind her, 6 children. All sizes, all shapes, none older than 12. They stood in a crooked row like fence posts half broken by weather, faces pinched with cold and fear. No one spoke. The woman's lips moved, but nothing came out. Then she blinked hard, swayed on her feet, and fell straight into his chest. Levi caught her before she hit the ground, his arms locking tight around her shoulders. She clutched his collar, eyes wild now, breath shallow. "They're coming," she gasped. "Please don't let them take my babies." Then she went limp. Levi barely had time to set her down on the floor before the children rushed in behind her. No pushing, no crying, just quiet desperation. The littlest, a girl no older than 3, curled against her mother's side and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob. The others stood frozen, too cold or too scared to move. He looked at the woman again. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked, clothes threadbare. The oldest boy, tall, gangly, maybe 12, stepped forward like he meant to speak, but his jaw clenched shut and he dropped his gaze instead. Levi didn't need to ask where they came from. It wasn't here. It wasn't anywhere close. He lifted the woman carefully and laid her on the couch near the hearth. Then he turned to the kids. "Get close to the fire. Take your boots off. Fastest way to lose toes is sitting in wet leather." They moved without question. That told him plenty. Children who obeyed without a second thought had learned too early what happened when they didn't. Levi stoked the flames, added 2 more logs, then poured water into the kettle and set it to boil. Only once their shivers began to ease did he kneel beside the woman again. Her pulse was there, weak but steady. He draped a blanket over her shoulders, then stood. The boy spoke at last. "She's Margaret," he said. "Margaret Ashe. I'm Caleb." Levi nodded. "You the oldest?" "Yes, sir." The others now sat huddled near the hearth. A girl with freckles and dark braids, maybe 10, twin boys, pale and stone-faced, about 8, the toddler curled beside her mother, and another girl, somewhere between the twins and the baby, with tangled hair and eyes too sharp for her age. "Names?" Levi asked. "Annie, Eli and Emmett, Ruth, and Josie." Caleb said it all at once, like he'd rehearsed it in his head 100 times. "All right," Levi said. "They eat lately?" Caleb hesitated. "Not really." That was all Levi needed. He turned back to the shelves, pulled down a tin of beans, some cornmeal, and a bit of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was hot and ready fast. He set the bowls in front of the kids, and they didn't waste a second. No one spoke while they ate. The fire snapped. The wind scratched at the shutters. And Margaret Ashe lay still on the couch, her chest rising and falling like each breath was a battle. When she finally stirred, Levi was sitting near the stove, carving a scrap of wood with his pocket knife. She opened her eyes slow, blinking against the firelight. "Easy," he said. "You passed out." She tried to sit up. He reached over, steadied her. "Kids are fine. Eating. Warming up." Her shoulders sagged in relief. Then she saw the rifle leaning beside the door. Her eyes locked on it. "Did I say it out loud?" "You said they're coming." Levi's voice was quiet. "Didn't say who." Margaret wiped at her face with a shaking hand. "My husband is dead." Levi said nothing. She glanced toward the children. "He died last spring. At least. I think he did. He left to settle a debt. told us to stay put. He never came back. Levi nodded once. But someone else did. Her voice caught. A man he owed. He said it wasn't about money anymore. He said my husband made promises, offered collateral. Levi's stomach sank. She swallowed. He said we were the collateral. Outside, the wind picked up. Levi leaned forward. How far behind are they? I don't know, Margaret whispered. They followed us out of Morgan's Pass. We cut through the low valley, but the wagon broke. We walked the rest. We've been moving for 6 days. How many men? 3, maybe 4. One wears a red bandana. Always rides ahead. I think he's the one in charge. Levi stood. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled the rifle off the wall. Checked it. Loaded it. Quiet, smooth like muscle memory. Caleb looked up sharply. You're going to fight them? I'm going to stop them from walking through that door, Levi said. That's the only promise I'll make. He turned to Margaret. They coming for you or the kids? She closed her eyes. I think they want all of us. For different reasons. That told him more than she meant it to. He walked outside into the cold. The stars were faint behind the clouds, the air sharp enough to sting his lungs. He stood there listening. No off-beats, no voices, but it didn't mean they weren't close. Inside, the children were finally settling. Margaret sat upright now, hands wrapped around a tin mug of tea. Her eyes hadn't stopped scanning the windows. They ever been safe? Levi asked her quietly. She shook her head. You will be now, he said. You don't know that. I know enough. He set extra rounds on the table. Rechecked the latch on the door. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He dragged the second cot out of the back room, laid it near the fire. Kids sleep here. You take my room tonight. Margaret looked at him, startled. It locks from the inside, he said. They won't get in. Her eyes welled, but she said nothing, just nodded. By the time the fire burned low, the children were asleep, some on the cot, some on the floor, curled together like pups in a den. Margaret stood at the doorway to the bedroom, watching them. Then she turned to Levi. I don't know who you are, she said, but I think you just saved our lives. You don't need to know who I am, he said. You just need to know this place is yours now, for as long as it takes. She stared at him a moment longer. Then she stepped inside and closed the door. Levi sat down beside the fire again. The rifle stayed in his lap. He didn't sleep. He didn't plan to. And when the first howl of a coyote echoed through the hills near dawn, it wasn't fear he felt. It was readiness. Because Margaret Ashe wasn't just running from something. She was running toward a reckoning. And now it had his name on it too. The cabin was still, but peace doesn't last long when men are hunting children. Levi made himself a wall between them and whatever was coming. But even walls can crack, and by the time the sun rose, the past was already clawing at their door. It was Caleb who woke first. His feet hit the floor like he'd never known rest, eyes snapping open and sweeping the room before the light had even reached the windows. He moved with purpose, quiet, careful, not a sound to wake the others. Levi noticed. From his place in the corner, still dressed, still armed, Levi had not closed his eyes all night. Not once. He watched the boy, the way he checked his siblings, tucked the blanket back over Ruth's shoulder, then crept to the stove and stirred the coals. You ever sleep? Levi asked. Caleb jumped slightly, startled to find the man awake. Then he shrugged. Didn't want to. Levi stood and crossed to the stove, added wood with practice motion. You always keep watch. Since Pa left, Caleb said. Somebody had to. Levi didn't say it out loud, but he thought it. This boy had raised himself while raising 5 others. That kind of burden leaves grooves in a child's spine that never really straighten again. He handed Caleb a tin cup. There's coffee, but it's strong. I'll drink it. He did. Didn't flinch. One by one, the cabin stirred to life. Annie blinked awake first, already reaching for Ruth to make sure she was close. The twins were next, sitting up like mirrors, rubbing their eyes in tandem. Josie woke crying, a soft, whimpering noise that stopped the second Margaret touched her cheek. Sho, baby. We're safe, she murmured. Levi didn't miss the way she said it, like she needed to believe it too. He made oats and dried fruit, enough to fill small bellies. Margaret helped serve, though her movements were stiff and careful. The baby hadn't let her sleep much. Neither had the weight of fear. But she smiled where she could, nodded encouragements, kissed foreheads. She was doing everything she could not to fall apart. And Levi saw all of it. "You always live alone?" Margaret asked him once the children were eating. "Mostly. No family." He didn't answer, just turned back to the kettle. That was answer enough. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." The morning passed slow and quiet. But not the kind of quiet that brings peace, the kind that hums just below the skin. The kind that warns you something's waiting on the other side of stillness. Caleb stood by the window most of the time, watching the trees. By noon, Levi saddled his mare. Margaret stepped onto the porch, arms crossed tight. "Where are you going?" "Nowhere far. Just need to check the ridge. Look for tracks." "I thought you said we were safe." "I said no one would walk through that door. Didn't say I'd wait for them to knock." She didn't argue. Just reached down, pulled a small pistol from her coat, and tucked it into her apron. "I'll keep watch here." Levi blinked. "You know how to use that?" "I know how not to miss." He almost smiled. He rode out fast, staying low in the saddle, keeping to the tree line where branches would break his silhouette. The snow was shallow but fresh, and he found what he was looking for before long. Hoofprints. Not just one set. 4. Exactly as she'd said. One rode ahead of the others, always cutting wide, checking paths. And they were close. Too close. Levi swung down, crouched beside the trail. The lead horse had a heavier gait, carried a bigger man, maybe someone wearing armor or a heavy coat. But the real detail that mattered came from the rear. One of the riders had boots dragging in the snow. A child's boots. No, he looked closer. Not dragging, stumbling. Someone had been with them, once. Someone wasn't now. His stomach turned. He stood fast, scanned the ridge, then climbed higher to a rocky outcrop with full view of the valley. Smoke. A thin, gray line curling from a spot maybe 2 miles east. Not a campsite. A burn. Purposeful. Message or warning, he couldn't tell. But what he could tell was this. They weren't just looking for Margaret. They were hurting her, tracking her trail, watching where she went and how fast she moved, which meant they knew. They knew she'd stopped running, and they were coming to finish what they started. He rode hard back to the cabin, the wind cutting like knives. By the time he arrived, the sun had begun to dip, casting the valley in rust and bloodlight. He dismounted before the porch and called out low, not wanting to startle the kids. Margaret met him at the door. "They're close," he said. She didn't flinch. "How long?" "Less than a day." "Maybe less than that." She nodded. "Then we don't wait." Levi tilted his head. "I don't want my children to see me beg," she said quietly. "I don't want them to watch me scream." "They won't." She looked up at him, then truly looked, like she was searching his eyes for cracks, places fear might be hiding. She found none. "I believe you," she said. That night they prepared. Levi taught Caleb how to hold the rifle steady. Not shoot, just hold. Steady hands save more lives than fast ones. Annie watched the door, sharpening sticks with her dinner knife and laying them like traps. The twins tied fishing line to tin cups and hung them outside the windows. Ruth helped Margaret pack bags with food and water, just in case. And Josie, too young to understand, sat in Levi's lap as he carved her a tiny horse from pine. When he gave it to her, she smiled so wide it nearly broke him. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched, and then came the first sound. A horse's breath. Close. Labored. Margaret's head snapped up. "They're here." Levi moved to the door, looked through the crack in the shutters. Only one man stood outside, on foot, coat flapping in the wind, face hidden by a wide brim and a red bandana. Levi didn't move. The man called out, "Margaret Ashe, you've been gone long enough." His voice was cold, controlled. "You've got something that belongs to my employer, and we've come to collect." Margaret stepped up behind Levi, shaking. Levi opened the door, didn't step outside. Just let the firelight fall onto his face. The man squinted. "Who the hell are you?" "Doesn't matter," Levi said. "You keeping her here?" "I'm keeping her safe." The man chuckled. "You know what that costs." "I do." A pause. Then, "You ready to die for people you don't even know?" Levi didn't blink. "You ready to die for money that isn't yours?" That struck something. The man stiffened. He whistled low, and 3 more shapes emerged from the trees, rifles in hand, faces hidden, all of them smiling. They came smiling like men who'd never lost. But Levi had buried too many good folks to smile back. As rifles rose and secrets surfaced, the past clawed its way through wood and fire. Because some debts aren't measured in coin, but in who's left standing. Levi didn't blink. He didn't speak. Just kept the door open wide enough to see them all. 4 men. 1 with the red bandana, the talker, the leader. The other 3 fanned out slow, deliberate, like they'd done this before. Like they expected it to end quick. Margaret stood behind Levi, barely breathing. "You've got children in there, don't you?" the red bandana man called, almost cheerfully. "Shame to let him see things they'll never unsee. Why don't you send him out now? Real peaceful-like, and we'll make this quick. No need for screaming." Levi's voice was quiet. "You ain't here to make anything quick. You're here to collect property. Problem is, there's no property in this house. Only people. And you'll be dead before you cross the porch." The man took a single step forward. Levi raised a rifle slowly, almost lazily, and the man stopped cold. "All right then," the leader said. "Have it your way. We'll be back at dawn." That gives you time to explain to her what happens when you try to cheat men with no patience left. He turned, walked back toward his horse without looking back. The others followed, disappearing into the trees with the kind of confidence that came from years of unchecked violence. Levi waited until the woods swallowed them. Then he shut the door. Inside, the cabin was silent. Even the children had gone still. Josie clung to Annie's side, her little hands fisted tight in her sister's shirt. Caleb stood by the window, pale but steady. Margaret finally found her voice. "You think they'll come back?" "They will," Levi said. "And they won't knock next time." "What do we do?" He looked at her. Really looked. "That depends. You want to run again?" Her mouth trembled. Then she shook her head. "There's nowhere left to run. Then we make a stand." That night was spent preparing. Reinforcing windows. Moving furniture. Levi showed Caleb how to load a rifle, how to aim, how to count your shots in your head, so you never found yourself empty when it mattered most. The boy nodded through every word, not because he understood, but because he knew there wasn't time not to. Annie took the kitchen knives and hammered them into the tops of planks. The twins laid more tripwires. Ruth and Josie stayed close to Margaret, who wrote a note and tucked it into the lining of her coat, just in case. "What's in the note?" Levi asked. Margaret didn't meet his eyes. "If they get me, you make sure the kids get out. This tells whoever finds them who they are, where they come from, that they're worth saving." "You think I'd let that happen?" "I don't think you'd have a choice." They both knew she was right. Levi had survived battles before, fought in a war where men learned too late that courage didn't stop bullets. This fight wasn't fair, but it wasn't unwinnable. At midnight, the snow started again, light but steady. A quiet hush fell over the valley, muffling the sound of breath and footsteps. The storm was a blessing, cover for movement, cover for escape. If it came to that. Levi stayed up, back to the fire, eyes on the windows. Margaret lay near the children, but didn't sleep either. Every so often their eyes would meet across the cabin. No words, just a steady, silent pact. Whatever happened, they'd fight together. And then, just before dawn, Ruth screamed. Levi was on his feet before the sound finished echoing, rifle up, heart pounding. The window had shattered. A rock. No, not a rock. A bottle, still leaking fire, lay in the middle of the floor. Flames clawed up the rug. Smoke filled the air. "Get them out," he barked to Margaret. She herded the children to the corner as Levi smothered the fire with a quilt, stomping out embers before they reached the walls. The cabin filled with smoke fast. Annie was coughing, tears streaming down her cheeks. Emmett was yelling. Josie was screaming now, too high-pitched to be soothed. "They're here," Caleb shouted from the back window. Levi didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rifle and flung the door open, smoke trailing behind him. The cold bit hard, but the world outside was burning. They'd set fire to the barn. Levi's heart sank. That meant the mayor, the stores, the escape. Gone. A bullet snapped past his head. He ducked and fired back. One of the men darted behind a tree. Then came the sound Levi hadn't wanted to hear. Bootsteps on the porch. They were trying to circle to the back. He turned just in time to see a shadow in the window. Caleb raised the second rifle, trembling. "Wait," Levi said, but it was too late. The boy fired. The figure dropped. Levi shoved the boy aside and rushed out the back door. What he found stopped him cold. It wasn't one of the men. It was a boy, 17, maybe 18, holding a rusted knife and a revolver with no rounds left. His shirt was soaked with blood. He wasn't one of the attackers. He was running from them. The kid gasped once, coughed blood, and tried to sit up. Levi knelt beside him. "Who are you?" The boy wheezed. "Name's Simon. I ran. They took my sister. Said I was too old to sell." His eyes fluttered. "They're not just after Margaret. They've got others. Women. Kids. Shack in the canyon." And then he died. Levi stared at the boy's face for a long second. Then he rose and walked back into the house, his hands covered in someone else's blood. Caleb met his eyes. "Did I?" "No," Levi said. "You didn't shoot him. He was already bleeding out." A lie, but a necessary one. Inside, the smoke was clearing. The children were silent again. Margaret's eyes locked on Levi as he wiped the blood from his hands. "They've got others," he said. Her jaw clenched. "I should have known it wasn't just me," she whispered. "It's not. What do we do now?" Levi looked at the children, then at the flames licking the barn to its bones. "We go to them before they come to us." "You mean attack?" "I mean free whoever's left and burn that shack to the ground." "Can we win?" "I don't know," Levi said, "but I know what it feels like to lose. And I won't let these kids feel it too." Margaret stepped forward, picked up the rifle Caleb had dropped. "Then let's finish this." They were no longer defending a cabin. They were hunting down a wound festering in the valley. Levi and Margaret set out before sunrise, the 6 children watching from the doorway, knowing too well what it meant when grown-ups didn't say goodbye. The trail to the canyon cut east, through narrow gulches and thickets of sage. Levi moved fast, boots kicking through ash-lace snow, his rifle slung tight, and eyes scanning every ridge. Margaret followed, her steps light but sure, the borrowed rifle resting against her shoulder. She hadn't asked to come. She'd simply picked up the weapon and said, "You'll need someone who doesn't flinch." They moved in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because every word would cost more than they could afford. The barn had gone up like tinder. Supplies, escape, all of it lost. And behind them, 6 children sat in a cabin with smoke-stained lungs and eyes wide from what they'd already seen. There was no safety left to offer, not unless they burned out the sickness that had taken root below the canyon. About a mile in, they found the first sign. Boot prints, horse tracks, and a tarp, bloodied and discarded, tangled in the roots of a juniper. Margaret crouched beside it, fingers brushing the torn edge. "This was ours," she said. From the wagon. "They've been watching since the pass," Levi muttered. "Like wolves." They kept moving. By late morning, the wind picked up again, gusts that sliced between rock faces and turned every shadow into a potential rifle barrel. But Levi knew how to track through fear. He read the land like scripture, the way branches bent, the shift in hoof prints when a rider dismounted, the faint indentation of a dragged boot that told him someone had tried to run. Around a narrow bend, they came upon the canyon. And there it was, the shack, low and hunched between 2 spines of rock. Smoke rose thin and bitter from a crooked chimney. One horse was tied out front, tack still on. Another stood near a tree, stamping impatiently. A lantern hung on a hook outside the door, even though the sun was full overhead. That's how Levi knew. They didn't expect company. They were home. He ducked low behind a fallen tree. Margaret crouched beside him. "How many?" She whispered. "Can't see yet, but we know there were 4. One's likely keeping watch, maybe in the trees. We wait for night. We wait for movement." And sure enough, it came. A man stepped out of the shack, yawning, gun tucked into his waistband like an afterthought. He stretched, spat, and shouted something back inside, something about stew and heat. Then he turned and walked toward the horses. "Want me to take the shot?" Margaret asked, already raising her rifle. No, Levi said. Wait. A second man emerged. Tall, broad, carried himself like a man who liked hurting things. He lit a cigar and leaned against the doorframe, talking to someone inside, laughing. Then the door swung open, and a girl stepped out, not older than 15. Her hand were tied, her cheek bruised deep purple. She wore someone's oversized shirt, barefoot in the snow. Levi felt something burn in his chest. Not rage. Not yet. Something older. Something more dangerous. Remorse. He hadn't gotten there fast enough. The second man barked at the girl, kicked snow at her feet, then dragged her by the elbow toward the shed behind the shack. That was it. Levi rose. Now. They moved. He hit the first man at the horses with the butt of his rifle before he even knew someone was there. The second turned at the sound, mouth already forming a curse when Margaret's bullet caught him high in the chest. He dropped like an axed tree, the cigar tumbling from his lips and landing in the snow. The girl screamed. Levi ran to her, cutting the ropes from her wrists as her whole body shook. It's all right, he said. You're safe now. But she wasn't looking at him. Behind you. He spun. Too late. The third man barreled from the trees, swinging a club. It caught Levi high on the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. His rifle skittered across the ice. Margaret turned to fire, but the fourth man, red bandana, tackled her from behind. Her rifle clattered to the rocks. They wrestled in the snow, limbs tangling, breath heaving. The girl ran, barefoot and screaming, vanishing into the trees. Levi rolled, dodging another blow from the club. He lunged for a rock, swung it hard, and caught his attacker in the knee. The man stumbled. Levi didn't wait. He surged forward, driving the rock into the man's face once, twice, until the blows became wet. Margaret screamed. Red bandana had her by the throat now, shoving her into the side of the shack. Should have stayed with your brats, he hissed, cocking his pistol. Levi didn't think. He moved. He grabbed the fallen rifle. One shot. Red bandana's head snapped back. His body dropped like someone had cut its strings. Margaret slumped to the ground, coughing. Levi ran to her, helped her sit up. You all right? She nodded. He said there were more. In the mines west of the pass. He looked around. Blood painted the snow. The shack's door swung open in the wind. But it was done. For now. They searched the building. For more girls. All huddled in a back room. Terrified and cold, but alive. 3 had bruises. 1 had broken fingers. But they all walked out under their own power. Levi didn't speak much on the way back. Neither did Margaret. What was there to say? Some monsters didn't hide. Some didn't snarl or threaten. They smiled. They laughed. They called themselves men of business. And they'd walked right into Levi's valley. It was nearly sunset when they returned. Caleb was the first out the door. He saw the blood on Levi's coat, the way Margaret leaned heavily on him, and didn't ask questions. He simply opened the door wider. The 6 children crowded the room, wide-eyed. And behind them, the girl, the first one they'd saved, stood silent. She didn't speak until Levi met her eyes. My brother, she whispered. Simon. Margaret froze. Levi nodded slow. He died protecting you. The girl blinked, tears rising. Then I'll live for him, she said quietly. That night the cabin was full. Levi laid out spare blankets, let the rescued girls sleep near the hearth. Margaret moved from child to child, checking for fever, offering warm broth, whispering comfort. And outside the wind blew hard. Cold, but not cruel. They'd survived something. But Margaret knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because when the man with the red bandana died, he'd dropped a letter. And in the dying firelight, Levi read it aloud. Shipment expected in 21 days. Confirmed delivery of 7 girls and 2 boys. Payment upon arrival. Margaret felt her stomach turn. Levi folded the letter. There's more of them, she said. Levi nodded. Then we go, she said. Where? Wherever the next girl needs saving. There was no plan. Just firelight, 6 children for more rescued souls, and the weight of knowing others were still trapped in shadows. Margaret didn't ask for war, but war had come, and now Levi was loading bullets like prayers, one for every name not yet found. Dawn came in slow shades of ash. No sonrise. Just the suggestion of light behind the clouds, dull and uncertain. The air outside the cabin was brittle with cold, but it wasn't the kind that warned of snow. It was the kind that settled in when something else was about to break. Inside, no one stirred early, not even Caleb. The children slept in clumps, warmth stolen from each other and from the bodies of those newly rescued. Margaret lay with Ruth and Josie curled against her, her arms wrapped tight, not from comfort, but as if trying to hold together what little hadn't shattered. Levi sat at the table, boots muddy, coat damp from riding out before dawn. He'd gone alone to bury the 4 men in shallow, unmarked graves somewhere past the ridge. It wasn't out of mercy. It was because leaving them above ground would attract wolves. He hadn't spoken since returning, just placed a small book on the table, Simon's, found in the boy's coat. Pages thin, filled with scripture, sketches, and 2 names written in blocky, scrawled ink, Simon Ellard and Della Ellard. Della. Now asleep by the fire with her back turned, her shoulders so tense they looked like they'd never known peace. Margaret stirred first. Her voice was hoarse. "You're back." He nodded. "Did you?" "They won't get up again." She sat slowly, careful not to wake Ruth. "And the book?" Levi said. "Might help her later. For now, she doesn't want to remember." None of them do. A long silence stretched between them. Margaret glanced around the cabin. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced now by pine, stew bones, damp wool. A strange kind of stillness had settled over the place. Not peace, but pause. "What now?" she asked. Levi didn't answer right away. He stood and went to the window instead. Watched the tree line. Listened. "There's more," he said finally. "You think so?" "I know so." He walked to the fire, crouched beside it, and dropped in the letter they'd taken off red bandana. Flames curled the paper. Blackened, ink vanished in a hiss. "It had a seal," he murmured. "RP with a sword through it." Margaret frowned. "I've seen that before. Years ago, a man came through our town. Said he was collecting for a ranching syndicate, something about buying up land. He had that seal on his gloves." Levi met her eyes. "It's not ranching." "No," she whispered. "It's not." The children began to wake one by one. Emmett sat up, then Josie, then the twins. Della stayed by the hearth, unmoving. Ruth blinked awake with a soft whimper and crawled into Margaret's lap. Caleb emerged last, alert already, his eyes tracking Levi as he paced. "You think he'll come back?" he asked. Levi didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." "How many?" "Enough to burn this whole valley flat." Caleb's jaw set. "Then we don't wait here." Margaret stared at him. "You want to run again?" "No," he said. "I want to stop running. But we can't fight them here. We're sitting ducks." He wasn't wrong. The cabin had been a refuge. A miracle. But it wasn't a fortress. Margaret stood, still holding Ruth. "Then where?" Levi walked to the map he'd pinned beside the door. An old thing, frayed and stained, with most of the ink worn away. He tapped a spot west of the valley. "Carter's Mill," he said. "Old settlement. Abandoned now, but still got stone walls. A spring. And if the trails haven't washed out, we can get there by nightfall." "What if they're already on the road?" Margaret asked. "They'll come through the east. They always do. We'll cut west, across the dry basin. Hard trail, but off the main track." She hesitated. "Then how long to pack?" Levi looked around. 30 minutes. Take what matters. Leave what doesn't." The cabin turned to motion. Caleb and Annie rolled blankets. Emmett helped Levi wrap jars in burlap and tuck them into a crate. Margaret strapped Ruth to her back, then helped Della change into a clean dress. The girl moved like a ghost. Silent, watching, distant. When Margaret offered her a coat, she didn't speak, just took it and pulled it tight around her body. They left just after noon. The walk was brutal. No path, just snow-packed ridges, hidden gullies, and frozen creek slick as oil. Levi led, cutting through drifts and pulling Josie along when her legs gave out. Margaret came second, carrying Ruth and guiding the twins, while Caleb and Della brought up the rear. Della said nothing. Caleb talked quietly, mostly about nothing at all. How many birds he saw, the shape of the clouds, whether stew would taste better with salt if they ever found some again. The girl never replied, but she listened, Around dusk, the basin spread open before them. Levi stopped and pointed to a cluster of low buildings wedged between a rise of stone and a crooked stand of pines. Carter's Mill, he said. It didn't look like much. 3 main structures, walls leaning like drunks. A well long since dry, but the wind was blocked and the place was hidden from the trail. Most important, it had a cellar. They took shelter in what used to be the meeting hall. The roof held, the door latched. The cellar below was musty but dry. They ate jerky and oats by firelight. The children curled up close, too tired to talk. Margaret cleaned Ruth's feet and checked Emmett's palms for splinters. Then Levi said something no one expected. "We can't stay here more than a night." Margaret stared. "We just got here. They'll track us, and we're not the only ones running. You think there are more camps?" "I think there are more letters." He pulled something from his coat. A badge. Margaret took it slowly. U.S. Marshal. Levi looked tired. "Not anymore," he said. "Haven't worn it in years. Didn't do much good. But someone out there is organizing these camps. Deliveries, routes, buyers. That takes infrastructure. You were investigating this?" "No," he said. "I failed to. A long time ago." Margaret's voice softened. "Who did you lose?" "My sister," he said. 19. She vanished near Prescott. I searched every trail from here to Durango. Found her grave 5 years later in a canyon no one marked. No name on the stone. Just a bracelet I carved for her when we were kids." Margaret reached out and placed a hand on his. And still he didn't flinch. "You think they're still operating across counties?" she asked. "I know it." That letter didn't name Bitter Hollow. Didn't even say Ash. Just the number of goods. They didn't know who. Just what. Margaret's mouth was dry. "How do we stop something that big?" "One camp at a time." She nodded slowly. "But not with children in tow," he added. "You and I can ride. Leave them with someone safe." "Who?" "There's a widow in South Point. Runs a boarding house. No questions. Keeps a loaded shotgun above the stove. She'll take them." "You sure?" "No. But I trust her with my life." That night, after the fire died low, Margaret walked outside alone. She looked up at the stars, clear, sharp, uncaring. Ruth's weight had left her back hours ago, but her shoulders still felt it. Levi joined her. "We ride at dawn," he said. "Just you and me. Caleb will stay here until we return. And if we don't, then he knows where to take them." He held out the old marshal badge. "You'll need this." Margaret hesitated, then took it. The metal was cold. Heavier than it looked. Inside, a child whimpered in their sleep. Neither of them moved. By the time Levi and Margaret rode south, dawn had already lost its battle with the storm. Behind them, children huddled in an abandoned mill, guarded by a boy who had never held a gun until last week. Ahead lay a world carved by rot. Names whispered, children traded, justice sold by the barrel. The wind cut sideways through the pass, slicing along the horses' flanks and turning breath to smoke. Levi's mare, borrowed from a mining camp 3 valleys over, was fast but already limping slightly from the frozen trail. Margaret's gelding kept pace, despite the weight of saddle packs and the stiffness in her shoulders. Neither rider spoke. There was nothing left to say. Not after the badge. Not after Simon. Not after holding children who flinched from light and startled at kindness. South Point was 3 days' hard ride. Levi planned to make it in 2. By sundown, they'd cleared the last bluff that overlooked the canyon where Red Bandana's shack had stood. The snow was gone there now, melted by fire and churned up by horses and boots. Blackened remnants marked the place. Bones of what had been. Margaret pulled her horse to a stop. "You ever think," she asked quietly, "what it would be like to live in a world that didn't need people like you?" Levi didn't turn, just stared down at the ashes. "I used to," he said. "But then I learned men like me only exist because someone else stopped paying attention." They camped without a fire that night, high above the basin where the stars hung low enough to scrape skin. Levi stayed awake long after Margaret's breathing had slowed, polishing the rifle that had belonged to his father and memorizing the routes he'd once chased bandits through, back when he wore the badge for real. Back before Prescott. Before that bracelet. In the morning, they moved fast. No talking. No rest. The trail turned to gravel. then packed dirt as the valley opened wide. Fences returned. Smoke from real chimneys. The illusion of safety. South Point rose in the distance like something built too fast and too proud. A handful of buildings ringed a central church. Horses drank from a trough near the saloon. And on the far end, past the mercantile, past the stage house, stood a tall, sloped-roof boarding home with flower boxes frozen stiff and a single rocking chair on the porch. A woman sat in it. Levi dismounted and handed Margaret the reins. "You stay here," he said. "I thought you said you trusted her." "Edo. But trust doesn't mean showing up with strangers unannounced." He stepped onto the porch. The woman didn't rise. She was older than Margaret had expected. Silver hair plaited and wrapped into a bun, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders, eyes so sharp they made Levi seem tired. "Marshall," she said. "Not anymore. You still got the look." He handed her a folded scrap of parchment. She read it once, twice, then looked up. All of them. Every last one. The woman didn't flinch, just nodded once and said, "Bring them." Back at the mill, Caleb watched the ridgeline like it might explode. Della sat beside him, sharpening sticks in a makeshift stakes and not once speaking unless spoken to. The other children had begun to ease slightly. Ruth let Josie braid her hair. Emmett helped Annie clean the cellar steps, and the twins tried to teach themselves how to whistle. They were beginning to believe the worst might be behind them. And then someone knocked on the mill's door. Caleb froze. No one was due back. Not yet. And no one who meant well knocked gently at a place this forgotten. He reached for the rifle Levi had left him. "Stay inside," he hissed to the others. The knock came again. A little firmer. Still not loud. He opened the upper slat of the door, a narrow beam of light, and peered out. A man stood on the porch. Bowler hat. Gloves too clean for travel. No horse in sight. "Good morning," the man said. Caleb didn't respond. "I'm looking for someone," the man continued. "A woman. Tall. Black coat. 6 children. You wouldn't have seen anyone like that, would you?" Caleb gripped the rifle tighter. The man smiled. "It's all right. I'm with the Rook's Passage Mercantile Syndicate. You may have heard of us." Caleb said nothing. Of course. You're just guarding your home. That's good. Smart." He leaned slightly, enough for the sun to catch his lapel. "There. The symbol. RP with a sword through it. Just like the letter. Just like the shack." The man tipped his hat. "If you do see her, let her know Mr. Thorne stopped by, and that it's not too late to honor a contract." Then he turned and walked back down the path, disappearing into the trees like smoke. Caleb bolted the door. By the time Levi and Margaret returned with the children, night had fallen again. The boarding house lights glowed from every window, warm and soft. Inside, the woman, Miss Ida, she said, had already prepared 3 rooms. Blankets folded, soup boiling, and not one question asked about scars or bruises, or why Emmett couldn't sleep without the rifle Levi gave him. Margaret pulled Levi aside in the kitchen. "While you were out, I asked around town," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "There's a name that keeps coming up. Gregory Valley." Levi's expression darkened. "I know the name," he said. "Who is he?" "Used to run cattle. Now runs men. And if the Rook's Passage seal's involved, he's likely the one signing checks." "You think he's in town?" "No, but he'll have agents here. He's expanding, new rail lines, new land. Needs a labor." Margaret went still. "Children." Levi didn't answer. She stepped closer. "What would happen if we cut off one of the routes? Derailed one of their shipments?" He met her gaze. "They'd come for us." "Good," she said. That night, Caleb sat on the porch with Emmett and Annie. Levi gave them each a piece of bread, then dropped a map on the table beside them. "You're not kids anymore," he said. "Not out here." Caleb nodded. "We already knew that." And when Levi turned, Emmett said something that made him pause. "When do we fight back?" They left as shadows and returned as fire. With Levi and Margaret came a reckoning long overdue. But vengeance isn't justice, and nothing clean ever grows from blood-soaked ground. What they found in Valestown would tear open every wound they thought had scarred. By dawn, they were already saddled. No lace. Not even to the children. Margaret couldn't bring herself to do it. not when Ruth had finally stopped waking in screams. Levi had left instructions with Miss Ida, a satchel of coin, a second rifle tucked beneath the bed frame, and a folded list of names. If neither of them returned in 7 days, she was to pack up the children and head for the ridge near Falcon Nest. He had an old friend there. No questions asked. Safe passage guaranteed. They rode south under a sky smudged with ash-pale clouds. The trail was mostly dry now, the thaw claiming more land by the hour, though frost still lingered in gullies and shaded bends. The mountains fell behind them. The open basin stretched long ahead, where trains ran like veins and cattle towns cropped up like infection. By evening, they reached Vale's town. It didn't have a proper name. On most maps, it was simply labeled Junction 5, a stopover on the trade route where water was scarce but gold rumors ran thick. But the moment they passed through the outer fence, it was clear who owned it. Erpe, painted on every crate, branded into every horse stall, embroidered in red on the shoulder patches of every uniformed man lounging by the saloon or pacing the station yard with 2 new boots and pistols they hadn't earned. Margaret sat straight in the saddle. What do we find him? Levi's voice was quiet. We don't. We'll let him find us. They dismounted near the telegraph office, pretending fatigue. A long ride. Bad luck. 2 travelers looking to trade supplies for food, maybe ask about work. Margaret slipped easily into the role. She always had. Her shoulders slouched. Her voice softened. She even managed a half-smile when shopkeeper asked if she was looking for a dress warmer than that coat. Levi, meanwhile, said almost nothing. But he saw everything. The freight schedule posted at the station. The pair of young girls hauling crates down the alley, guarded by a man with a shotgun who never once looked away. The ledger left open behind the bar. Lists of cargo, dates, numbers scrawled too neatly. Room for 2? Levi asked, tossing down a silver dollar. The barkeep didn't blink. Top of the stairs. Don't lock the door. House rule. That told Levi all he needed. They waited until midnight. Then they moved. Margaret picked the office first. The RP building across from the saloon. 3 floors. 2 guards. Levi took one with a jab to the windpipe and a firm elbow across the skull. Margaret drugged the other. Just enough opium to keep him dreaming. Inside, they found ledgers. Not names. Not faces. Just numbers. 1023, Bitter Hollow, 738, Sparrow Gulch, 1194, Prescott cleared, 211, Mill Orphans, in transit, next delivery, 3 days, through Route Ashdown. What does that mean? Margaret whispered, her hands shaking as she flipped the pages. It means they've already sent more, Levi said, from a place we just saved. That's how deep this runs. Then boots. Someone coming up the stairs. Levi doused the lamp. They pressed against the shadows as the door swung open. A man stepped in. Alone. He wore a black duster, fine gloves, and a lapel pin that gleamed even in the low light. Erpe. And something else beneath the coat. A sword. Not ceremonial. Real. Worn. Blooded. Marshal, the man said softly. Margaret flinched. Levi didn't. Vale, he replied. Gregory Vale smiled like a preacher about to deliver bad news he'd been rehearsing for years. You've made quite the mess, he said. A whole camp gone. My men dead. Letters intercepted. You even took the badge out of your drawer. Levi stepped forward, calm. It never left my coat. Vale's eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what you've undone? Do you know how many buyers are waiting? How many shipments delayed? This was order, Hale. You called it rot, but it was structure. You can't burn down a system with rage. You only make martyrs. I'm not here to be a martyr. No, you're here to die. Vale drew fast, but Margaret was faster. The first shot hit his shoulder, spinning him hard. The second caught his thigh. Levi moved before the third could land, slamming the door and dragging Vale to the ground as he howled. The sword clattered away. His gun slid under a desk. Levi pinned him. Where are they? He asked, voice low. Vale laughed through blood. Everywhere. You could kill 100 men like me and still not touch the root. You think you're the first to try. Levi pressed his knee harder. You think I'm trying? He hissed. This is personal. Vale spat blood. You're already too late. Margaret found the shipment manifest. One word stood out: Railcar 9. 3 nights. Headed west. Then we're not late yet, she said. They bound Vale. Dragged him to the edge of town under moonlight. Left him tied to the rail spur with the sword jammed through his coat into the dirt. A note pinned to his chest. For every name you sold, we'll take a piece back. By morning, the whole town would know. And by then, Levi and Margaret would be long gone. They rode hard, cut across plains where fog hung low and willows grew thin and tired. Stopped only to water the horses and reload. They didn't talk about what came next. They didn't need to. At dusk, the tracks appeared again, and beyond them, an old rail station turned warehouse. Crates everywhere, and a single train. Black, still, waiting. Railcar 9 stood open. A boy leaned out, eyes sunken. He didn't call for help. He just blinked, like he'd already given up trying to dream of rescue. Margaret's breath caught. They moved without hesitation. Through guards, through gunfire, through every damn name Vale had ever written. They kicked the door off its hinges. Freed 24 children. Scattered them into the woods with whispered names and trail directions. Some were too weak to walk. Margaret carried a girl with burns on her arms. Levi held a boy so small he barely weighed more than a coat. And when the guards regrouped, when the real storm arrived, Margaret stood in front of the train with her rifle raised, shoulders squared, and yelled, "Come get them." They didn't. Not that night. Not when Levi lit the engine fire and sent the train rolling empty and blazing into the canyon beyond the trestle. The crash echoed like judgment, and with it, one piece of the system shattered. The train burned in the canyon, its metal bones glowing red as dawn crept over the basin. But the war wasn't over. Not when names still sat in ledgers, not when children still flinched at kindness. Margaret and Levi hadn't come this far to win. They'd come to end the losing. Ash drifted for miles. It coated the pines in gray dust, settled in Margaret's coat, melted on Levi's skin. The wreckage of Railcar 9 still smoldered somewhere far behind them, but they didn't look back. What was gone was gone. The children they'd freed had scattered into the trees, a dozen pairs of small feet vanishing over hills and down ravines like deer loosed from a trap. None had the strength to thank them. None needed to. Margaret walked with a limp now, shrapnel from the explosion. Levi had tied it off with a strip from his shirt, gritted his teeth, and carried her half a mile until she could put weight on it again. The girl in her arms, her name was Lena, hadn't made a sound in 3 hours. She just stared wide-eyed at the sky, as if trying to convince herself it was real. "They'll send more," Margaret said finally, her voice frayed from smoke and cold. "Let them," Levi replied. "We won't be here." She looked at him. "Then where?" "Back to the mill. To Caleb. To the others." Margaret almost smiled. The thought of Caleb pacing the porch, trying to keep Ruth from climbing into the rafters, or Emmett teaching Josie to carve firewood with a stick that wasn't nearly sharp enough. It made the blood in her chest feel warm again. They traveled slowly, cutting through forgotten trails and dry washes. Kept the fire low at night. Took turns watching. Every time Margaret closed her eyes, she saw Vale smile. Every time she opened them, she heard hoofbeats. They reached the mill at dusk. But something was wrong. The porch lantern was dark. No smoke from the chimney. Levi stopped first, hand going to the rifle. "Wait here," he told Margaret. But she followed. The door wasn't locked, just pushed open. Inside, silence. The hearth cold, quilts folded. No dischis. No boots by the wall. Margaret felt the air drain from her lungs. "They're gone," she whispered. Then, a creak above. Levi raised the rifle. Margaret grabbed the revolver at her waist. Another creak, then a voice. "Don't shoot. It's just me, Caleb." He peeked down from aloft, face pale but unhurt. Margaret let out a cry before she could stop it. "Where are they?" "Safe," he said, clambering down. "Miss Ida came back 2 days ago, with her brother. Said she had a place better than this. Said to wait here in case you came back." "Why didn't you go too?" Levi asked. Caleb glanced away. "I said I would, but I had to make sure you got back first." Something in Levi's expression softened. Margaret sank onto the nearest chair. "Are they okay?" He nodded. Ruth's still bad with nightmares, but Emmett's gotten good with the rifle. Annie and the twins started drawing again. Della doesn't talk, but she hums sometimes. Margaret wiped her face. Where did Ida take them? Caleb handed over a note. In tidy handwriting, North Slope Cabin, past Widow's Cross. Look for the white scarf in the pine. Don't delay. Trouble is coming faster now. Levi folded the note. We leave tonight. Margaret shook her head. I can't. My leg. I'll carry you if I have to, Levi said. Caleb grinned faintly. She'll hate that. I already do, Margaret muttered. They rode again under moonlight, each hoofbeat counting down seconds they didn't have. Twice, they spotted movement in the trees, scouts, maybe, or animals too curious for their own good. Once, Levi spotted a fresh boot print. Broad, deep, headed north. By morning, snow began to fall again. Just enough to erase tracks. They found the scarf tied high in the pine. Past it, a small homestead built into a rise of rock, nearly invisible from the trail. Smoke curled from the chimney. A child's laughter rang out across the clearing. Margaret dismounted before the horse stopped. She limped toward the porch, heart hammering. The door opened. Josie. She blinked, then screamed, Mama, and ran. The others followed. Emmett, Annie, the twins, even Ruth, who stumbled and fell and got up again all on her own. They collided into Margaret like a wave. Della stayed back, one hand against the doorframe, her eyes uncertain. Margaret reached a hand toward her. It took a full minute. Then Della stepped forward and gripped it. Tight. Inside, Miss Ida stood with arms crossed, brow furrowed. You took your time, she said. Levi nodded. We burned their rail. She exhaled. Well then, sit down. I've got stew. The children buzzed around the cabin like bees let back into spring. Margaret sat by the fire, unable to speak for a long while. Just held Ruth and watched Emmett show off a clumsy knot he'd tied. Watched Annie braid Josie's hair. Watched Caleb try not to cry when he saw Della smile, just for a second. Levi poured coffee. Did we win? Margaret asked him, finally. He didn't answer at first. Then, we bought time. For them. She nodded. Outside, snow fell thicker now. A quiet, steady fall like the land was finally exhaling. Levi rose and walked out to the porch. Margaret followed. From the ridge, smoke curled, different this time. Controlled. Someone had started a burn. Probably a crew from another town. Maybe to clear brush. Maybe to hide something. We're not done, are we? Margaret asked. No, but they'll be safer now. He looked back at the cabin, at the sound of Emmett's laugh, the clatter of boots, the thud of something falling over. Safer than they were yesterday. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the badge. I don't want it, she said. Neither do I. But someone's got to carry it. Levi took it, turned in his palm. The metal gleamed even in the low light. Not for justice, Margaret said. For memory. He nodded. The wind picked up slightly. More snow on the way. But the cabin held. Inside, a dozen second chances clung to life, to each other. And outside, two tired souls stood shoulder to shoulder. Not because they were whole, not because they were strong, but because they had learned that sometimes survival was its own kind of war, and choosing to love after everything was the bravest weapon of all.